It has been such a big year for rap. It has been such a big year for rap beef, and it's time that I cover the biggest rap beef of the century, maybe even of all time. And no, I am not talking about the Kendrick Drake beef. I am talking about the beef that is heating up in Bikini Bottom. That's right, one of the most intense beefs we have ever seen is not East versus West. It is not Canada versus the West Coast. It is happening in Bikini Bottom. And we thought this beef was over last year, but it has seen a whole second wind that I don't think any of us suspected. These two players are totally unrelenting, and it has led to some great music. So if you haven't been keeping up, I'm gonna catch you up to speed real quick. Basically what happened last year is Mr. Swags and Dankton were trading shots back and forth because they own two competing restaurants, the Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket. Now, Dankton started throwing shots while secretly trying to steal Mr. Swags' Krusty Krab formula. Now, Mr. Swags quickly assembled a team of his employees, SpongeBob and Squidwalk, along with SpongeBob's friends, Notorious P.A.T. and Sandy the Squirrel. Meanwhile, Dankton is holding it down pretty much by himself. The only support he has is his wife, Karen. It's really feeling like a 20v1, but unlike Drake, Dankton is really holding his own. Dankton starts dabbling in mind control. He briefly takes over Notorious P.A.T., having him spit one of his hardest verses against Mr. Swags, but they get Patrick back. They kill Karen, but Karen is resurrected as a giant mech. She puts SpongeBob in critical condition, but SpongeBob recovers. They turn his pet Gary into a giant, and then the entire team collaborates on one giant posse cut and destroys Dankton's mind-controlled army and finally takes the Chum Bucket down with it. So that brings us to this year. At the top of the year, Squidwalk drops his first solo track, Trendsetter. Now, this song is kind of like Kendrick Lamar's recent pop-out performance. It's just a giant victory lap. They are literally rapping in front of the ashes of the Chum Bucket. The whole gang is there. They are backing him up as Squidwalk establishes his position as the trendsetter, the bandanaed, band-getting top shotta. And honestly, it's a really great song, and it shows that these artists are capable of making great music even without the motivation of a larger beef. And we thought we were done here. We thought Dankton was out for good, but in a miraculous turn of events, he comes back and introduces a whole second heat to this beef that no one saw coming. Turns out Dankton was not out, but he's been lying in wait this whole time, constructing his new establishment, the Clams Casino. With the opening of the establishment, he drops the song Mob Ties, which is an absolute banger, full of bar after bar after bar. The one I think is the most clever is where he says, "You know that I'm him, because there's only one eye," because there's only one eye in him, but also Dankton himself only has one eye. Bars. But that's not all. The biggest bombshell of this track is Dankton gains a much needed ally. That's right, Mrs. Puff comes out proudly on Team Dankton. Now again, Dankton handled the last round of the beef mostly by himself, so him having a new ally is huge, and Mrs. Puff makes a lot of sense. SpongeBob and Notorious P.A.T. just did shenanigans after shenanigans in her boating school classroom, caused a lot of chaos and destruction for her, so it makes a lot of sense why she has a motivation to come out against them. And she has kind of had her own huge arc herself. The last time we saw her was in Sandy the Squirrel's video, where she was dancing as a lady of the night, which definitely raises awareness for the fact that boating school teachers deserve a lot more, but Mrs. Puff clearly got her money up. She got her chest done. She got the BBL. She is now a force to be reckoned with. She is a whole new pufferfish now. So Dankton now has a new establishment. He has a new important ally, and he is raking in money. But the Mr. Swags team is not having it. Now, they lie low for about 2 months, but it turns out they've been hatching a plan to run up on the Clams Casino. And a few days ago, they dropped the song Ocean's 11. The song, of course, being named after the famous movie where they run a heist on a casino and that's exactly what they do. SpongeBob and Notorious P.A.T. make a huge entrance, gambling, throwing money, but it all turns out to be a distraction, so they could sneak into the vault and take all the money. And the song Ocean's 11 they release in honor of this heist is also an absolute banger. Personally, I might still prefer the energy of Mob Ties, but there are some truly devastating bars in Ocean's 11. It is one of the most clever and tactical disses I have seen from this collective. They take a lot of Dankton-isms and twist them in their own way. Now, some of Dankton's most popular ad-libs are when he shouts, "Gang!" and when he goes, "Yeah!" And it sounds a lot better coming from his voice. But notice in the hook of this song, SpongeBob makes sure to use the words "gang" and "yeah" repeatedly. Also, going all the way back to the song KYS, Dankton builds that whole hook off the refrain of singing "ha ha." Now, notice in his verse, Notorious P.A.T. uses the "ha ha" refrain too. Also in that same refrain, Patrick says he knows where they live, like Nardwar, and to keep his name out your mouth, like the hard har. That's a bar. That's a bar. And finally, one of the most clever moments that you might not have caught is remember in Mob Ties how Dankton said, "You know that I'm him, because there's only one eye." Well, in this song, SpongeBob makes it a point to say that he's going to hit him in his I. And IV's dripping, I. Now that's more than one eyes. So SpongeBob is saying it's more than one eyes. So Dankton can't be him. Bars! During this heist, it's revealed that Dennis the Don is on Team Dankton. He is the head of security at the Clams Casino, but honestly, he doesn't really do anything. SpongeBob and P.A.T. make a grand, flashy entrance, and he's just kind of walking around. And when they get into the vault, they throw fists a little, but he kind of just looks at them most of the time. Mrs. Puff is scrambling to pick up the slack, but it turns out to be too late. They get the money, they run. So the question now is what's next for Dankton? How is he going to come back? Can he even come back? There are a few different courses of action that Dankton can take. We have noticed he is switching up his plan. He is not doing the 20v1 stuff anymore. He clearly shows signs of wanting to build a team. And even though he suffered this great of a loss, if he could keep his team together and add new members, he might be able to come back stronger than ever. Mr. Swags and his gang have knocked him down over and over again, but while they're all talented, they very clearly have a numbers advantage. And I think if Dankton continues his plan of building up his own team, he's got Karen, he's got Mrs. Puff, he's got Dennis the Don. I think if he could get just one other key player, he might be a more formidable force that eventually Mr. Swags and his gang are going to have a tougher time competing with. So who else can Dankton add to his roster? Who else in Bikini Bottom have we not heard much of yet? I think there are a few ways Dankton could go. There is a whole cast of formidable characters hanging out in the Salty Spittoon. Now that is kind of a risky move for Dankton because they are very much on the chaotic evil side of the spectrum. If Dankton were to team up with them, he would have to watch his back. But if he could add enough incentive for them to join his side and he could keep them in check, they might be a force to be reckoned with. Because that is the toughest restaurant in town. We know that SpongeBob and P.A.T. are terrified of those guys, and I'm sure at least one of them knows how to spit some bars. Next, we got the My Leg guy, and similar to Mrs. Puff, he has a long history with SpongeBob and Patrick before they even rapped. Those two are responsible for injury after injury after injury, and his little fish leg can only take so much. At some point, he's got to hit the breaking point. He could have a very clear vested interest in being against these people. I think he would be a shoo-in for Dankton's team. Now, Squidwalk is one of the most formidable artists on that other roster, and I think the only way to get to him is to see if you could recruit his brother Squilliams. Now, Squilliams is in very high demand. He is more successful than his brother in almost every regard, and Squidwalk very clearly has a chip on his shoulder because of this. It would be a very tough pull because they are family, but at the same time, there is a lot of built-up animosity between the two, and if Dankton could recruit Squilliams, that more than anything would get under Squidwalk's slimy green skin. Another person we haven't heard from is Neptune. Now, Neptune doesn't hail from Bikini Bottom, but he's visited time and time again, and he always leaves a trail of destruction. Now, Neptune is an interesting case because I don't know if he would side with Dankton. He is so powerful, he might prefer to just take over Bikini Bottom all on his own, taking Dankton's empire down with it. He would be a very fickle ally, but again, if there was some deal that could be reached, it would be devastating. Again, what would be more likely is Neptune might try to take over Bikini Bottom on his own, and if that happens, you might even see a situation where the two rival gangs have to put down their beef for a minute to defend their hometown from the water god. So yeah, there are a lot of questionable characters. There would be a lot of uneasy alliances, whereas the alliance on the Mr. Swags team is so strong. But one key player that we're forgetting about, and we haven't heard from in quite a while, is ASAP Larry. Now, ASAP Larry is kind of the J. Cole of this beef. He doesn't want any involvement whatsoever. He is purely in music for the sake of the music and having fun. He says in his smash hit Dumbbell that he stays out of beef in the reef, but if we surf and turf, he's gonna make sure that you're done well. ASAP Larry is the strongest person in Bikini Bottom. Having him on your side would truly turn the tide of the beef. No pun intended, because they're underwater and turning the tide. Now, usually when conflicts like this heat up as much as the Bikini Bottom beef has, you're forced to choose a side one way or the other. At some point, ASAP Larry has been able to hold off this long truly because of how formidable he is. He is so strong that no one could really push him to one side or the other. But if tensions heated up so much and both sides became so powerful that eventually even he had to make a choice, whoever gets ASAP Larry on their side is probably taking home the W. So that very well could be a strategy that Dankton tries to use. Of course, ASAP Larry doesn't want any of that. He just wants to be a roided out lobster, working out, making bangers, and having fun. But if somebody crossed him, if you give ASAP Larry something to crash about, you can be sure that he will. And honestly, the Mr. Swags team is getting a little too big for their own good. They're starting to get too confident. They're getting cocky, and I could see that as something that rubs ASAP Larry the wrong way. So in conclusion, I think this Bikini Bottom beef is far from over. Both sides have shown themselves to be formidable, to have bangers, to have clever bars, to have absolutely biting disses towards their opponents. And while Dankton has suffered loss after loss, he has maintained a pretty good position despite a huge numbers disadvantage. And all his opponents, especially SpongeBob and Notorious P.A.T., have done so many shenanigans in Bikini Bottom. They have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and there very well could be another formidable fish out there that could spit some really great bars that has an issue with that team. I think Mr. Swags and his team need to watch out for that. They can't get too comfortable in the lead because Dankton only needs one more person to really be a force. This is one of the most insane times to be a hip hop fan. I mean, the Kendrick Lamar Drake beef, Megan Thee Stallion, Nicki Minaj, and now all this stuff happening in Bikini Bottom. This beef, I think, is far from over, and to stay up to date, you can subscribe to this channel. You can follow me everywhere at Robert2_Isaac. I'm also a filmmaker. If you want to see me pitch a full SpongeBob movie, complete with visual aid and a proof of concept trailer, I did that over on my film channel, Written by a Pod, and a link to that is in the description. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to this channel, and I'll see you soon.